Great. Well, welcome everybody. You are here at a virtual Meta Center for Nonviolence, and I'm Stephanie. I'm the executive director of Meta. I am here with many of you who are friends and team members and collaborators. So it's really lovely to be here with you. Michael Nagler, Meta's founder, is here with us as well. Hi, Michael. Um, and it's a real honor to welcome our guest today, Ela Gandhi. Many of you know her as a lifelong peace activist, a former member of the South African Parliament, and the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi. But beyond her lineage, her remarkable lineage, she has spent her life living and advancing the practice of nonviolence in her own right through community organizing, interfaith dialogue, and education for peace. Her work reminds us that nonviolence is more than a strategy, it's also a discipline of the heart, and it asks something of us inwardly, which include courage, self-reflection, as well as a willingness to transform ourselves even as we work to transform the world around us. And so today's conversation invites us into that deeper dimension. What does it take to live nonviolence from the inside out? How do we cultivate moral strength to stand for justice without hatred, fear, or retaliation? And Ela will guide us into these questions, especially the kind of conscience that makes nonviolence possible, what we're calling the power within. So, Ela, we are deeply grateful for your time and your presence with us here today, and welcome. And you are on silent, so we
Okay.
Okay.
And thank you so much for that introduction, Stephanie. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. And, I'm not an authority. I'm also learning from all of you. But I'm very happy to share the little experience that I have and the little knowledge that I have. So, firstly, I want to talk about the countries that depend on the military might and weapons to determine the extent of power they are able to exert in the world. Because today what we see is that building up, of weapons, building up of armies, and having the most potent weapons is what gives them power and what gives them perhaps, I can't find any other terminology, but their right, the right that they think they have to dominate over other countries and other people. So this whole strength and power is based on might, on military might, on weapons and armies. Whereas on the other hand, a non-violent activists, what are the instruments that give them power? And I would like to cite firstly the righteousness of the cause, what they hold, the truth of the matter is their first and foremost, weapon or thing that gives them the strength. The second is the mass mobilization, that is having the masses behind you or with you. And unless you have the masses with you alone, there is power that one can exert, but that power isn't enough to shake the world. It's only when you have the masses with you, as with Gandhiji in the Salt March, when he attracted millions of people to join him. That's when he was able to shake the might of the British Empire. So mass mobilization is important. Discipline is important in nonviolent struggle. Unity and moral strength are also important. Unity amongst the activists. It's, if activists are not united, then they cannot project the correct picture in the masses, among the masses, and they only confuse the masses. So that unity and moral strength are very, very important. So these are some of the determinants of the power of nonviolence. So just as the military training gives strength and power to the military, so too with activists, the training that they undergo gives them power to continue on a nonviolent path. Just as here in South Africa, in USA, and in India, satyagrahis underwent rigorous training to develop their courage, their conscience, and the determination to withstand all the abuse that the violent opponents would impose on them, and never allow the opponent to break their spirit. So while we recognize that the ruthlessness and the sheer barbarity of the violent attacks have led to some people breaking down, and we understand that such occasions do arise, but a large majority of the nonviolent activists have successfully withstood grave physical and mental torture without relenting. Examples of this are seen in all our struggle. There are many, many people within South Africa in our struggle. Some of them you won't even recognize the names, but they have gone through, so much of torture, and yet they didn't relent. So that resilience and dignity cannot be snatched away from us, no matter how much of barbaric methods the opponent uses. In fact, it eventually has the effect of pricking the conscience of the perpetrators and reducing their dignity, if there was any, to start with when they began using these methods. So compare, for instance, a person who has withstood immense torture and assault and remains steadfast in his or her beliefs. How much of pride such a person has in relating their stories.
Recording in progress.
And compare them to a person who has perpetrated the torture and assault or killed people and remains alive. With what kind of pride or self-image can such a person talk of his or her deeds? As listeners and witnesses, what goes through our minds? For that is what determines whether a person will still retain his or her dignity or lose it completely and feel ashamed of himself or herself. It is this plight that so many young people, soldiers returning from the war face, and that is why many cannot live with themselves. So even if they win, they lose because their self-respect is damaged. And this can be, psychologists, social workers who have seen what happens to those soldiers who come back from the war. They will tell you what are the effects of the war, of the carnage and so on young people who come back from the war. How great will be the day when all these youth who sign up for the army refuse to go to war, as did the many objectors of conscription. I think Muhammad Ali, for instance, And many in South Africa, we had a whole group of people in South Africa, young people who refused to be conscripted. We had a whole campaign called the End Conscription Campaign. And these people still retain that pride and that dignity that they earned from taking a stand. On the other hand, compare that with the people who gave in and went and killed people. What pride, what dignity do they have? So that is the one thing that people need to understand and know about war and about violence. Any kind of violence, anyone who perpetrates violence, that is what they lose, that dignity, that self-respect. And so, you know, who are our heroes and who are the villains? We need to think about that. And I think that when we talk about that, that's when the community begins to understand the extent to which violence actually affects the perpetrators and not the victims. The victims may get hurt, they may die. Whatever happens to the victims, it's much less than what happens to the perpetrator because they have to live with their conscience. So that is the issue. I think that's a very important point that needs to go out to the community. The next point that I thought of were the 14 rules. Gandhiji, when he trained satyagrahis to go on the Salt March, the Dandi March against the British, he told them very clearly, firstly, that, they may die. In fact, when Gandhiji established Sabarmati Ashram, from where the Dandi March started, when he established that ashram, the site, that land, was between Sabarmati prison on the one side and a graveyard on the other side. And he said that satyagrahis have to be prepared to go to either the prison or the grave, because that is what is, something that one has to be prepared for. So in training the satyagrahis, Gandhiji established 15 rules. And I've just summarized those 15 rules, which he told, emphasized to all these people, the 75 people who started the Salt March. There were only 75. And that 75 brought millions at the end. So the first point was abide by the truth under all circumstances. Truth was the most important. The second was never utter a harsh word, no matter what. You don't get angry and utter a harsh word. Remain calm and composed. The third was perfect courtesy must be shown at all times to all people, even those who may be considered as enemies. So, no matter who it is, you respect them and you show them courtesy. Respect, I say respect because, you show courtesy to a person, you respect the human being. And Gandhiji always said, separate the human from the deed. So when you separate the deed, you don't like what he's doing. But as a person, you don't disrespect the person. So That is what you are saying, that always be courteous towards the people, no matter what they do. The fourth was that he said this is a holy war. And so all the rules essential for leading a religious life must be observed. So all the religious rules must be observed. It's not about fanaticism, it's not about extremism, but it's about the values, the basic values of religion. That is what must be observed by each person. And then the fifth one was we are opposing unharnessed power and not regulations which help to organize our lives. Therefore, we should help to uphold good regulations while opposing the oppressive ones. So, we have to divide. I mean, everything that the British did, you can't oppose all the things. There were some good regulations. You have to obey those. And the bad regulations must be opposed. So we must differentiate between the good ones and the bad ones. And don't oppose everything because it is British. And then the sixth one is act against the government as we would do to take corrective action within the family in a climate of love. Martin Luther King talks about agape, and that is what Gandhiji, when he talks about love, it's universal love. It's an all-pervasive love. And it's within that climate that you talk to the government or talk to the opponent so that you can bring about changes in them. You don't want to humiliate them. You don't want to defeat them in any way. So that's the sixth rule. And the seventh rule is win over people with opposing views rather than fight with them. So the idea is to win over those opponents rather than to argue and fight with them. The eighth one is we must always be frank and truthful. That is an important thing. And Bapuji Gandhiji was always frank and truthful. If it meant that you are going to die, he will say, yes, we are there. And we don't know whether we're going to die or we're going to come back alive. So don't give false hopes to people. Tell the truth and, be frank about it. But at the same time, he said, and this is the ninth rule, that we must be sensitive to the feelings and needs of the villagers, of the people that we are interacting with. Do not demand services from them. And he gave some choices, like, instead of asking them to transport you to various places, choose to walk instead. Then use other means of transportation. Don't impose on anyone. Where possible, eat the simplest food available. Don't fuss about food and, accommodation and things like that. Then the 10th rule was observe the economic and educational conditions of the people and where possible, help to raise their economic position through education and skills training. So those who would be staying in those villages and helping the villagers, help them to develop their skills and their educational and economic condition. So, he said we must create opportunities to train the village children as well. provide health education and improve sanitary conditions in the villages, help to resolve disputes in the community peacefully, encourage public reading of literature of importance to the cause of satyagraha, so that people begin to understand what satyagraha is, what the conditions are, and so on. And then finally, he said that satyagraha means fighting oppression through voluntary suffering. Therefore, use of arms is completely forbidden. Every volunteer must understand and commit themselves totally to the principles of satyagraha and then transmit this learning to others. So what he's saying is that we must teach by example. So we have to inculcate all these 15 rules within ourselves before we can teach other people to accept those rules. So, there is that importance of each of us beginning to change. Like Stephanie said, it's about nonviolence. It's not just an absence of violence, but it's about a lifestyle, changing your lifestyle to a non-violent lifestyle. And then for me, like 3 important lessons from all this is that we have to teach by example and not preaching, that we persuade and not try to co-opt people to support us. We must respect and have compassion for all, regardless of who. And in that way, we build unity and inclusion, of all the people in our struggle. Not everyone will be in the front line, but we will at least be able to gain their support in one way or another. And I'll give you a little example of the march in 1913, when Gandhiji marched in South Africa. This was like the biggest march in that time. In 1913, it was perhaps the first big march that Gandhiji had organized, big satyagraha. And that march was from Durban, and there were two. There was a party from Johannesburg coming to Volksrust, and a party from Durban going to Volksrust. Volksrust is a town that's on the border between the two provinces. And Indian people at that time, particularly Indians, had to have a permit to cross the border. They couldn't cross the border without a permit. So to defy the law, they crossed the border without a permit. And so from Johannesburg into Natal, from Transvaal to Natal at that time, the province was called Transvaal, and this province was Natal. And to cross the border from Natal into Transvaal. Now, to do that, people had to walk through many little towns. And these little towns were largely occupied by white people. There were many white residents in the town. And this whole struggle was against discrimination. So, under normal circumstances, if a white person living in a town sees thousands of Indians marching in, they would naturally either get scared or they would begin to think, these people, we need to chase them out of here and begin to shoot at them or take action themselves. before the police can do anything. So the community would take actions, or community would begin to, fear them and so on. Now, how to avert that? Gandhiji had to think about it. And so he sent people as advance, group to go into each of those towns before the people came in and get the white community together and explain to them why these people are marching, what is it that they are asking for, and that they are marching in peace. This is the method that they are using. They are all peaceful. They are just going to go past here. They're not going to interfere with anyone. They're not going to be destructive. And they may stay over in, open spaces if they have to spend the night or something. And that's how they managed to get support from some of the white people. So, I was talking to Asha and we were just looking at biblical stories. And what came to mind was, the parable, Matthew 13, I think it is. That's what Asha gave to me. And it's about the sower who throws the seeds. And so that is what this advanced group did. And what actually happened is that there was no incident. The entire march was successful. That's number one. Number two is that there were some white people who went out of their way and made sandwiches and tea and offered drinks to the marchers. So you had some people who actually actively supported them, some people who just stayed away and said, okay, let them do what they want to do, but we're not going to get involved. So that is how that march was successful. Similar things happened with the Salt March. There was always an advanced group that went out and got, the support of the place through which this group was going to march. So nobody was taken by surprise that who are these people coming into our land, our town or village or whatever it is. There was an advanced group that already notified them, prepared them, and then the marches came through. So in the case of India, there was lots of support for Gandhiji and his group going through the villages. But I'm talking about South Africa, where they really had to work hard to get the support of this group. Similarly, in other cases, I think with Martin Luther King, the march in Selma and all that, they had to, get support and train the people, train the volunteers. And amongst the volunteers, you also get the, what's the word now? People who keep control, amongst the group to make sure that nothing happens.
Monitors.
Sorry, what's the word?
Monitors.
Monitors, yeah. So monitors, in case somebody gets sick or something happens, they are there to make sure that that is taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that is basically what I wanted to share. There are many other things as well. I think, to build up moral support, moral strength, the inner strength, we have to engage in spiritual exercise. There are a number of things, meditation, contemplation, understanding yourself, being able to control yourself. There are so many things that a person has to do to strengthen. Just as you have good nourishment, gives you physical strength. So to build your moral strength, you have to have good nourishment. Otherwise, you can't build that resilience and that strength. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ela, for that presentation. It reminds me a lot of what recently took place in the United States. There was a group of monks that walked from Texas to Washington, D.C. And they started off just a small group. And then as they moved around, they started being accompanied by hundreds of people each time they moved in a town. It was incredible. So that when people even would come out to see them, they would experience something that they couldn't put into words either, just even looking at them. But it seemed to be responding to a deeper concern about peace and unity and courage. Now, the monk's walk, though, was non-confrontational, whereas Gandhi's Salt March was a confrontational march. So it has an added element. He was walking with people to say, no, the salt is ours and we're going to take it back. Can you comment on that for us, the idea of non-confrontational versus confrontational actions?
Okay, so yeah, now we do have a lot of marches that are non-confrontational, that are actually marches for peace and for compassion, Ubuntu, and things like that. And then as we go, people see, that these people are doing something that I identify with, and they come and join. They come, we have marches where we tell them, if you support us, would, because we're walking on the road, so a motorist passing by would and show their support. So things like that do happen in non-confrontational marches. But as you said, Gandhiji's march was a defiance march. Here in South Africa, we also have defiance campaigns. Many campaigns where we defined particular laws or particular things. And we knew that people are going to be arrested. We knew that the police would try to instigate people to do something that will give them the authority to arrest them because they threw a stone, so we can shoot at them. And, things like that. But nobody sees that that is an instigation that has been brought into that particular protest. To avoid that, we have marshals that are trained, that look, that walk alongside the people and make sure that any new people who come in are also obeying the rules of the marches. Nobody is causing disruption or, any violence or anything like that. Because one little act of violence can put everything off. So that is the difference between a defiance march and just a ordinary march where you are not defying any laws or anything. Also, it's very important for people to know why you are defying. Because if they don't know, if the marchers themselves don't know what they are defying, that completely breaks down the whole spirit of the march. So they need to know what they are defying, and they need to know exactly what can happen, and they need to know why they are defying whatever they are defying. So those are some of the important criteria, something that every organizer of a defiance campaign must know and must do before they go and define. So it's like, if you go to war, you can't just give a person a gun and tell them go to war. He might probably shoot his own army, then shooting others because he doesn't know how to use the gun or how to use the weapon or what to do, who to listen to, and all that. So they got to go through rigorous training to get into violent action or in the army. The same principle applies to nonviolence. You have to have that training and you have to know what is it that you are defying, why you are defying it. And the people around also need to know. Therefore, the media is very important. And if you see, I'm not so sure about Selma and other marches, but I know definitely with Gandhiji's marches in India and in South Africa, he had media on his side all the time. That 75 people who left Sabarmati, within a day, the entire world had heard about that march. So, and everything about the march. So, media is an important part, and Gandhiji always, that's why he had so many media. He started Indian Opinion in South Africa. He had many newspapers in India, different names at different times. They got banned. They were, another newspaper came out the next day with another name. And it went on. He had newspapers, his own papers, where he could express his own views. And that was important because other people can distort what you are saying, I hope that explains, Tiffany.
It's a good starting point. At Meta, we really strive for nonviolence education, and it, that's why we're here. And so these conversations and these explorations can go really deep for us, but we're also trying to build people up so that when movements take place, that they're anchored in nonviolent practice and ideals, which are not necessarily what organizers of marches or events are able to do or do. So I really appreciate you taking on some of these questions, even though you have to be somewhat brief about them. I have a couple questions here from the group, and I want to thank everybody in the group for adding your questions into the chat so that I can help facilitate this conversation. And I'll read a couple. I'll read one and then give you a chance to respond, and we'll just kind of go through for a little bit more with Ela to help respond to some of these questions. So this one says, in the context of Gandhi's definition of a quote holy war and staying true to religious values and beliefs. This is
Sorry, I didn't hear that, Stephanie. Can you
okay.
repeat?
So yes, so in the context of Mahatma Gandhi's definition of holy war and staying true to religious values and beliefs, one of our challenges in the US is trying to bridge the gap between various religious beliefs, including those who do not follow any religion. In your experience, what are the methods and attitudes that help bring people together around shared values, even if their religious beliefs differ?
Yes, so Gandhiji, if you read about him, you'll see that his prayers were always in the open. There's no building, there was no church, no mosque, no temple. His prayers were outside in the open. So it was always universal. They recited the prayers were, sort of recited in every religious group. So no matter which religion you belong to, you were welcome to say the prayer, and we'll join you. We'll join you in your prayer, in the Christian prayer, in the Hindu prayer, in the Muslim prayer, in the Parsi prayer. Whatever prayers you want to chant, we will come and we will join you. So there was that universal acceptance of all religions. And Gandhiji said that religions are different paths to the same goal. So you may have different languages, you may say it differently, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing that you are saying. So these parables as well that you find in the Bible, there are many parables in the Hindu faith. There are many parables in the Islamic faith. And in all other, faiths, people use stories and parables to teach. And so, these are common sort of things in every faith. And if we can look at the commonality and not the differences, and if we try to understand the basic tenets of every religion, you don't have to convert to any religion, but you need to understand to respect the religion. And every religion has enough content in it for us to respect it. But if you look for the differences and criticize the differences, then you will find many things to fight over. And this is what is happening with the extremist groups. And so when Gandhiji talked about a holy war, it wasn't a Hindu holy war, Christian holy war, or Islamic holy war. It was a spiritual holy war, because he was talking about the inner strength which you can gain from any religion. All religious faiths give you that power within yourself. For as long as you believe in your text and understand it and practice it, all our texts tell us about compassion, about love, and if we practice that truly, then we gain that strength, we gain that humanity.
Okay, thank you. There's some more questions, and this one is a bit of a challenge to what you've been saying, so I want to bring it out. There's a sense that times have changed between Gandhi and today, and that there seems to be a sense that violence is that the movements that are using nonviolence today are against more ruthless opponents than other movements in the past. So the question goes, these are very different times from when the Salt March took place. For example, the 2025 Global Samud Flotilla and Freedom Flotillas before that were all nonviolent direct actions, but they didn't succeed in changing the situation in Gaza. Some say nonviolent resistance requires the opponent or oppressor to have a conscience. But what if the opponent or oppressor doesn't have a conscience? What if the opponent or oppressor is psychopathic? And I'm reminded of Kwame Ture's famous quote that says, Dr. King's policy was, if you are nonviolent, if you suffer, your opponent will see your suffering and will be moved to change his heart. That's very good. He only made one fallacious assumption, and that is, in order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none. And then the person said, I'm adding that Israel also has none. Can you speak to this question and concern?
Uh, it's Gandhiji, said that you must separate the person from the deed. So I know that a lot of terrible things are happening at the moment, But consider, for instance, what happened in Jallianwala Bagh, where thousands of people were in the stadium and they were shot in cold blood. They had nowhere to go. They had to be there. And, they were just killed. Now, can anything be worse than that? So in every war, every situation, you have terrible, ruthless, things that happen. But one can change them because a person gains that, the conscience of the person doesn't come out, doesn't sort of show up for as long as there are enough people to back that person. The minute that person doesn't have any backing, and when that backing crumbles, then the conscience comes out. And then the person begins to realize that what I did is wrong. But for as long as they are held together, they support each other and the conscience is bolstered that you are doing the right thing. These people deserve what you've done and that sort of thing. And that makes them stronger. It's not the armaments that makes them stronger. It's that backing that makes them stronger. And the minute you can penetrate that backing and break off, little by little, break off that backing, then the person's conscience would come out. So that's how it is. I mean, a simple thing is when you have a fruit and you have this hard layer outside, you have to chip off that layer to get to that sweet fruit inside. That's how life is, I think.
I'm aware that you've really been
Thank you, Michael.
I'm aware that you've been thinking about these questions for a long time, and your own activism is deeply influenced by these principles and ideas, and even these difficult questions. And one thing that I understand, as we see in a variety of contexts happening now in 2026, is that that nonviolence is a threatening force. And so what happens when a regime feels threatened is that they will repress more. And so instead of thinking that, well, nonviolence didn't work, what we have to understand is that nonviolence helped to push and escalate the conflict toward a new stage, which exposes the repression at a greater level. Can you speak to that about the way that nonviolence creates that dynamic where regimes will push back? And what can you do to continue to build courage and active nonviolence in times during repression? You lived under house arrest, for example. So
yeah, I mean, we had terrible repression in South Africa. When I look at the whole, set up in South Africa, house arrest was the least, thing that could, affect one's morale. There were people who were tortured, killed, and badly tortured. If you look at the testimony in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it's mind-boggling what they did to people. And these are things that we knew that is happening, that could have happened to us. We could have been imprisoned. We could have been tortured. Anything could have happened. So, that the determination to overcome, and that determination and resilience to say that we're not just going to accept the situation, which is what happened in India in the Salt March, during the Salt March and aftermath, that people began to say, no more, we're not going to accept this. And the British saw that no matter how much they had tried to, to oppress the people in India, they wouldn't succeed. There were many numbers were great in India. And if all the people rose up, they wouldn't be able to continue with their oppression, their colonization. So that was the one thing. But the other thing was also what Gandhiji did, that, if you look at politically, what is the definition of colonialism? And colonialism stands on, different pillars. One of them is to take the resources from the colonized country, take it to their country, process it, make it into whatever goods they are, and have a cheap market to sell, have a ready market to sell the goods. Not cheap market, a ready market to sell the goods. So you have the market because they are not able to produce those goods. Therefore, you have a market, and you take the resources, the raw resources away from them. You impoverish them, and you create that dependency in the colonial country. Now, how do you strengthen yourself against that? And one of the things Gandhiji did was the cotton, grow your cotton, process it, don't sell it, and nobody can force you to sell it and give it away. So you keep it, you process it. You make your own thread in your own house. Nobody can stop you from doing things in your own house. If you had a factory, they could stop you. But in your own house, if you are spinning, nobody can stop you. So you can spin in your own house and then make your cloth and wear it. And, don't accept the British cloth. That was one way of economic struggle. In South Africa, what they did is there were large farmers in South Africa. Farming community was big in South Africa. So the anti-apartheid movement was encouraged by South Africans. When Mandela and Sisulu and them went out on exile, Oliver Tambo went out in exile, they began to talk to the churches. It was Father Huddleston from South Africa who went out and managed to get a number of church leaders in the different countries to come together and to decide on, having a strong anti-apartheid movement outside the country. So it was Oliver Tambo, it was Nelson Mandela, and many others. Nelson Mandela was eventually in Robben Island, but Oliver Tambo was in exile. And he organized the anti-apartheid movement. So, we used to produce outspan oranges. Some of the people would remember that it used to be stamped outspan. And nobody bought those oranges. And then the farmers in South Africa felt the pinch. And when they felt the pinch, they started telling, that's the outer covering of the government, the support structure. And when that begins to melt, then people, would have to change. So there was that boycott. There was the boycott of sports. Sports is an important thing. It was very important. It's important for Israel as well. If people decide that we're not going to play with Israel any longer, and Israelis themselves who support, you know, the the Palestinians can, you know, begin to mobilize. And if they do, you know, that unless, you know, we begin to break off that support structure around those people, you are not going to be able to change. But once that support structure breaks down, the conscience will come out, everything will come out, and they'll be ready to actually honestly negotiate, not dishonestly negotiate, because they have been dishonest negotiations. We need honest, sincere negotiations and change.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, there's you've been through a lot, and we've also covered a lot of ground here. It's also important, I think, to remember the nonviolent movements do exist. So as we started this conversation with you today, you were talking about conscientious objection. There's there's a lot of that in Israel at this time, and those stories are getting smothered. Like, don't look at that, don't think of that. So as practitioners of nonviolence, as satyagrahis ourselves, our role is also to help lift up those stories, support those movements, understand where they're happening, and then, really advocate to get them out there and to fund them, get them larger, because that is to show that there's another way that we can deal with our international affairs by supporting nonviolent movements.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we need unity amongst us.
May there be
If we are
unity
not
amongst
united, if we're fighting amongst ourselves, there's no chance, you know, for the nonviolent movement to succeed. We have to create unity and understanding. And, you know, we have to be ready to accept, you know, that we don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers, because I say this is, you know, boycott is the strategy that we have to use. It doesn't mean that there isn't another way. There are many ways that one can use. And it's only through discussion, coming together, that we can decide, okay, you know, after this discussion, all of us unite behind one thing and then do it together as a united group. That is what we need. At the moment, we are very disunited. So, yeah.
Ela, we're coming up here on the edge of the hour, so I just really want to thank you for everything that you've presented and shared with us today, and for answering some of our questions. It's been an honor to have you share your experiences with us. And it's, I think if people want to continue to have these conversations and continue to explore and learn about nonviolence, you can find out more at MetaCenter's website, metacenter.org. We have programs, trainings like this, conversations. But I guess anything else you would recommend that people do post this meeting today, Ela? Anything off the top of your head?
I think, you know, it's important that if we weren't able to allay some of the fears, or some people have other views, you know, let's hear all of them and let's have that discussion. I think the forum should be open to all ideas, and that is important. Unfortunately, I took up too much of time talking. I need to listen to what other people are saying and hear their views, and maybe all of us together, we can find some ways to understand, because it's only through deep understanding and unity that we are going to be able to strengthen ourselves, to be able to do anything.
I'd be very willing to help set up another space, another forum after this, if to continue a conversation, if that's something that would be of interest. So I will follow up with you and with folks about that. Ela, thank you so much for your time. We are so honored. And
Thank you
thank
so
you. Yeah, and thank you everybody for joining. If you want to jump off and say off mute and say goodbye, I'm going to stop recording now. But thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you, Ela.